Rows of wooden shelves, the faint scent of paper, and the low hum of air that made every sound feel sacred. That was where he found her. Or maybe she found him. He was 22, a regular visitor who preferred the company of old books over people. Yet that morning, something was different. Behind the desk sat a woman he hadn't seen before, a librarian with long black hair that framed her face like dark silk, her lightly tanned skin glowing under the warm light that filtered through tall windows. She must have been around 40, but she carried herself with the kind of quiet grace that made age seem irrelevant. Her dark brown eyes were calm, observant, and somehow knowing. He pretended to browse the shelves, though his attention never truly left her. The way she moved, careful but confident, was mesmerizing. She adjusted a stack of books, straightened a nameplate, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a rhythm that made time feel slower. She wasn't just working, she was present, a rare kind of calm that made even the silence around her feel alive. When their eyes met for the first time, it was accidental, or at least it felt that way. She looked up from her desk, caught him glancing, and smiled. Not a professional smile, but one tinged with curiosity and a flicker of mischief. He quickly turned back to his book, pretending to read, but his pulse betrayed him. He could feel her gaze linger for a second longer than it should have. Moments later, her voice, low, smooth, and measured, broke the silence. "You've been here a while," she said, her tone neither accusing nor friendly, but something in between. He turned, caught off guard, and nodded shyly. "I like the quiet," he replied. A soft laugh escaped her. "Then you've come to the right place," she said, walking around the counter toward him. The sound of her heels against the polished floor echoed gently. She stopped near his table, leaning slightly as she rearranged a few misplaced books. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral and understated, brushed the air between them. Their hands almost touched when they both reached for the same book. She didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers grazed his, light and unhurried. It was a brief contact, but charged like static before storm. Her gaze met his again, and for a fleeting second, the library didn't feel so silent anymore. Then she smiled, the corners of her lips lifting with quiet playfulness. "Careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This place has rules about getting too distracted." He froze, uncertain whether she was teasing or warning him. But before he could reply, she added softly, almost conspiratorially, "Keep quiet while I break the rules with you." And just like that, the library became more than a place for reading. It became the beginning of something he didn't yet have words for. Something that would whisper its way into his thoughts long after he left that day. He returned to the library the next day, telling himself it was for a book he hadn't finished. But deep down, he knew the real reason. He needed to see her again. The air inside felt familiar now, filled with the same quiet hum and the faint trace of her perfume. She was there behind the desk, glasses perched on her nose, flipping through catalog cards as if she hadn't altered his heartbeat the day before. For a moment, he just watched. The morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, laying soft gold across her long black hair. She looked effortlessly composed, lightly tanned skin glowing against the cream of her blouse, a pencil balanced between her fingers. Yet there was a hint of something else today, a tiredness behind her calm, the kind that only someone who's carried years of quiet longing could wear gracefully. When she finally looked up, recognition flickered in her eyes. "Back so soon?" she asked, her voice soft but teasing. He smiled. "Guess I forgot how peaceful this place feels." She tilted her head, studying him with that same knowing calm. "Peaceful can be dangerous," she murmured. "It makes you think too much." He wanted to answer, but words failed. There was something about the way she said it, like a confession dressed as casual talk. She gestured for him to follow and led him toward the older archives, a part of the library few people visited. Her heels tapped gently against the floor, echoing softly between shelves filled with forgotten books. "This section doesn't get many visitors," she said, "but I think you'll like it. It's quieter, more honest. He trailed behind her, close enough to notice the faint movement of her hair brushing against her shoulders. When she stopped at the end of the aisle, she turned to face him. The light caught her profile, mature, confident, beautiful in a way that wasn't meant to be noticed but couldn't be ignored. She handed him a book. "This one's never been checked out," she said, her voice dipping low. "Maybe it's waiting for the right reader." Their fingers touched again as he took it. The moment lingered longer than necessary. Neither spoke, and yet the silence was full, alive with tension neither wanted to name. "You always this quiet?" she asked, stepping a little closer. He swallowed hard. "Only around people who make me forget what to say." Her lips curved into a faint smile, equal parts amusement and understanding. "Then maybe I should talk less," she whispered. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. She looked up at him, eyes soft, warm, a spark of challenge within. And then, as if remembering where they were, she placed a finger gently against her lips. Sure, it wasn't a warning this time. It was an invitation. The sound of her whisper lingered long after she walked away, and he knew, no matter how many books he read, no words would compare to the way she made silence feel. Days passed, but the thought of her voice still lingered in his mind, soft, teasing, unforgettable. He had gone back to the library 3 times since, each visit more deliberate than the last. And each time, she found a way to notice him without ever truly approaching him. A shared glance over the rim of her glasses. A faint smile as he passed the counter. A momentary pause in her work, just long enough for him to feel seen. That afternoon, the sky outside glowed pale gold. The light poured through the tall windows, painting the aisles with warmth. He was in the farthest corner, the one rarely visited, flipping absently through a history book. The hum of silence felt heavier there, until her footsteps broke it. "I thought you'd be here." Her voice came, low and familiar. He turned, surprised. "You were looking for me?" She smiled faintly, walking closer. "I like to know who spends so much time in my library." "My library." The way she said it carried quiet pride. Her long black hair fell over her shoulder as she leaned slightly against the shelf, sunlight outlining her graceful figure. She wore a soft blue dress today, simple yet elegant, with the faintest scent of jasmine trailing behind her. "I come here because it's quiet," he said, though both of them knew that wasn't entirely true. She looked at him knowingly. Quiet can be dangerous, remember? Her tone carried a playful challenge, but her eyes, dark brown, steady, held something deeper, something almost vulnerable. He noticed the tiny laugh lines at the corners, the way her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say more, but didn't trust herself to. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them seemed suspended, like both were aware of an invisible line they were dangerously close to crossing. Then, without thinking, he took a step forward and handed her the book he'd been holding. Their fingers brushed again. That simple touch, skin against skin, sent a current through the still air. She glanced down at the book and smiled softly. "You know," she said, "most people come here looking for stories. You look like someone trying to be one." He laughed quietly. "Maybe I just found one worth reading." That made her pause. Her eyes met his again, softer this time, a faint shimmer of emotion she couldn't quite hide. Before she could reply, a distant sound echoed, the squeak of the front door opening, someone entering. She straightened instinctively, brushing her hair back. "Someone's here," she whispered, regaining her composed tone. Then, leaning just slightly toward him, her voice dropped to that same low whisper that had first undone him. "Don't disappear too quickly." And as she walked away, sunlight caught her hair, glinting like ink against gold. He stood there, heart unsteady, realizing something undeniable. He wasn't just drawn to her anymore. He was caught. The library was still quiet, but the silence now felt like a secret, one that only they shared. By the 4th visit, he no longer hesitated. The library, once a sanctuary of silence, had transformed into a space filled with unspoken anticipation. Each time he entered, he found himself scanning the aisles, searching for the familiar movement of her long black hair, the gentle curve of her lightly tanned face, the way her dark brown eyes seemed to notice him before he even reached the counter. Today, she wore a soft cream blouse tucked into a flowing skirt, her curvy figure outlined gracefully in the warm morning light streaming through the tall windows. He found her in the same quiet corner, adjusting a stack of books on a high shelf. The sunlight caught her profile, highlighting the subtle freckles on her cheeks and the soft smile lines that framed her lips. She looked up and caught his gaze. That brief moment, a mere second, sent a shiver down his spine. She nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement that made him feel seen in a way that went beyond casual attention. He stepped closer, pretending to browse the shelves. The smell of old paper and polished wood mingled with the faint trace of her perfume, a soft floral scent that seemed to cling to the air between them. He reached for a book on the same shelf, and their hands brushed lightly again, sending a small, electric spark through him. It wasn't accidental. He could feel the deliberate softness in the touch, the lingering warmth that made his chest tighten. She leaned a little closer to inspect the book he had chosen, her voice low and intimate. "That one has some hidden gems," she said, her words brushing against him like a gentle caress. He caught the way her eyes lingered, how the sunlight turned her dark brown eyes into pools of warmth. They moved together to a nearby table, each carrying a book. When she set hers down, he noticed the subtle curve of her smile, the gentle sway of her long black hair, and the grace in her posture as she settled beside him. The proximity was electric, yet comforting, a balance he hadn't expected to feel. Their conversation was casual, discussing passages and favorite authors, yet the undertone was undeniable. Every glance, every shared laugh, every slight brush of hands held weight. When she leaned in to point at a passage, her shoulder brushed against his, and he felt the quiet steadiness of her presence. The library around them disappeared, leaving only the warmth of her close, controlled energy. A sudden sound from the entrance startled them both, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Seems like we have to be careful today," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him again. All he could do was watch her as she adjusted the book in front of her, her fingers lingering a moment longer on the cover than necessary. The sunlight caught her long black hair, making it glow, and he realized with a sharp clarity that he had been waiting for this moment all along. Before leaving, she leaned just slightly toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't forget," she said, "some rules are meant to be bent." And as he walked out, heart racing, he knew the library would never feel quiet again. Not when she existed in it. Not when her presence could turn a simple aisle into something charged with unspoken promises. By the fifth visit, the library had become more than a place of books. It was a stage for quiet connection, a world where time slowed whenever she was near. He had grown bold enough to linger longer in her presence, letting his eyes follow her as she moved with that effortless grace, long black hair flowing like ink against the golden sunlight. Today, she wore a soft green blouse tucked neatly into a beige skirt, the lightly tanned skin of her arms catching the light, her curvy figure poised in a way that radiated calm confidence. Her dark brown eyes searched the room, then landed on him with that familiar spark, playful, yet intimate. He felt a flutter in his chest as she approached, carrying a small stack of books. The library's usual silence seemed to swell, filled with unspoken tension. When she placed the books down on the table near him, their hands brushed again, deliberately light, but lingering longer than necessary. The touch was casual to anyone else, but to him, it was magnetic, stirring a quiet excitement that he hadn't felt before. "You're always here at the quietest hour," she remarked softly, her voice teasing but warm. "I like the quiet," he admitted, though he knew she sensed the deeper truth. He came for her. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Quiet can be dangerous," she whispered, leaning slightly toward him. The subtle closeness of her body, the warmth radiating from her presence, made it impossible to focus on anything else. He noticed the delicate movement of her fingers as she adjusted a book, the way her long hair brushed against her shoulder, and the slight shimmer of amusement in her dark brown eyes. They began to share more than just casual words, small confessions disguised as casual conversation. She told him about a rare collection of poetry she adored, and he shared a few lines from a book that had moved him recently. Each exchange felt charged, intimate, as though the library itself had faded into the background. When she laughed softly at one of his comments, he caught the warmth in her expression, the subtle creases at the corners of her eyes that hinted at both maturity and playful vulnerability. She leaned closer, her hand resting lightly near his on the table, not touching him directly, but close enough for him to feel the quiet steadiness of her presence. "You know," she murmured, voice low, "some stories are meant to be shared quietly, just between two people." He swallowed, feeling the weight of her words and the tension in the air. Their connection had become a delicate dance. Measured touches, shared glances, whispered confessions, all unfolding beneath the library's sunlit quiet. The simple act of being near her had become intoxicating, the kind of pull that made him long for every second in her presence. Before leaving, she leaned back just enough to meet his gaze, dark brown eyes glimmering with mischief and something softer, something unspoken. "Remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "keep this between us." And as he stepped away, heart pounding, he realized that the library had transformed into a sanctuary not just of books, but of quiet secrets, one that only existed when she was near, and one he had no intention of ever leaving. The sixth visit felt different, almost electric. He had begun to anticipate her presence before he even entered the library, feeling a subtle pull in his chest that made each step toward the tall windows and polished wooden shelves heavier with expectation. Today, she was standing behind the circulation desk, her long black hair gleaming in the bright morning light. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into a navy skirt, her lightly tanned skin glowing, dark brown eyes scanning a list of new arrivals with a focused intensity. Her curvy figure carried a graceful poise, a calm confidence that drew the eye without demanding it. He approached cautiously, feeling the familiar flutter in his stomach. "You're here early today," he said softly, almost more to himself than to her. Her lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "Some mornings are best spent before the world arrives," she murmured, her voice low and smooth. There was a slight teasing quality to it, but beneath the playfulness, he sensed a genuine warmth. She gestured toward the back corner of the library, a quiet section rarely visited, the sunlight spilling across the wooden floor in a gentle gold. "Follow me," she whispered, and he obeyed instinctively. As they moved together down the aisle, he noticed every detail, the soft swish of her skirt, the way her hair brushed her shoulder with each step, the quiet rhythm of her breath. It was an intimacy in movement, subtle but profoundly affecting. She stopped near a small table tucked in the corner, sunlight highlighting the curve of her neck and the faint freckles across her cheek. "This spot is perfect for uninterrupted reading," she said, her eyes meeting his, dark and warm, lingering just long enough to make his pulse quicken. He settled into the chair opposite her, pretending to focus on a book, but he could feel her presence enveloping him. The air between them seemed charged, a delicate tension built on countless brief touches, shared smiles, and whispered words. She handed him a book, and, as their fingers brushed, it was like the library itself held its breath. That fleeting contact carried a warmth that radiated through his chest, quiet yet undeniable. For a few moments, they read in silence, the sunlight spilling across the pages and illuminating the curve of her hand as she turned them. Then she leaned slightly closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some stories are better when they're shared quietly, don't you think?" He nodded, unable to speak, and she let her hand rest near his on the table, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the gentle heat of her presence. Every glance, every slight movement, every soft laugh that escaped her lips created a world in which only they existed. When a distant noise echoed from the entrance, She straightened slightly, but didn't leave. Instead, she looked at him with a soft smile and a glimmer of mischief in her dark brown eyes. "Don't let anyone steal our quiet corner," she whispered, her long black hair falling over her shoulder like a curtain of silk. As he walked away that day, heart pounding, he realized the library was no longer merely a place of books. It had become a sanctuary of unspoken connection, where every glance, every brush of fingers, and every whispered secret created a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. The pull between them was undeniable, and he knew he would return, again and again, drawn by the warmth, grace, and quiet magnetism of the woman who had turned silence into something unforgettable. By the seventh visit, the rhythm of their connection felt almost natural, as if the library itself had grown around them, holding their moments in its sunlit aisles. He arrived early, heart beating faster than usual, anticipating her presence with a mix of excitement and quiet tension. She was already there, standing behind the desk, her long black hair falling in soft waves over her lightly tanned shoulders. She wore a pale pink blouse paired with a fitted skirt, her curvy figure graceful and poised, dark brown eyes scanning the catalog with a serene focus. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows gave her skin a warm glow, highlighting the subtle laugh lines that traced the edges of her smile. She looked up, and for a brief second, the world outside the library seemed to vanish. That familiar spark in her gaze, playful, warm, intimate, welcomed him as if she had been expecting him all along. "You're here again," she said softly, her voice carrying a teasing undertone that made him feel simultaneously exposed and safe. "I wanted to finish what we started," he admitted, nodding toward the quiet corner where they had spent so many unhurried moments together. Her lips curved into a faint smile, and she motioned for him to follow. The aisle felt alive with anticipation, the polished wood gleaming under the morning sun, dust motes dancing like tiny sparks in the light. She led him to the same secluded table, the one bathed in golden sunlight, and he took his seat opposite her, feeling a warmth radiating from her presence. This time, there was no pretense, no hesitation. As they exchanged books and shared quiet observations about passages, their fingers brushed deliberately, lingering a moment longer than necessary. The subtle contact carried a familiarity, a comfort that went beyond attraction. It was the understanding of two people slowly learning each other's rhythms, the quiet thrill of emotional intimacy unfolding in real time. "Some stories," she whispered, leaning slightly closer so that the warmth of her presence enveloped him, "are meant to be read carefully, savored." Her dark brown eyes held his, steady and knowing, and for a moment, the library seemed to shrink around them, the aisles and shelves fading into a cocoon of quiet connection. He realized how much he had grown attached to this. Her voice, her presence, the soft, intimate energy that seemed to pulse around her like sunlight. Each glance, each deliberate touch, every whispered word had become a thread weaving them together. The library was no longer just a place to borrow books. It was a sanctuary where hearts could speak softly in a language of stolen moments and shared secrets. As she leaned back, adjusting the book in her hands, her eyes softened. "You've been patient," she said, her voice almost a murmur. "And it's worth it." He felt a rush of warmth in his chest, a quiet elation that left him breathless. For the first time, the unspoken tension between them felt complete, balanced by the subtle comfort of mutual understanding. When he finally left, the sunlight catching her hair one last time, he knew that the library would never be the same. Not for him, not for her. It was a place transformed by quiet revelation, by the steady pull of two people learning to trust the space between them, and by a connection that was safe, tender, and utterly unforgettable. The story they had begun together had reached its gentle peak, a slow-burn romance written in whispers, glances, and the warmth of shared moments.